I am Geoff Eido. This is Lunacy, where we discern the sacred from the insane and admit that whether we like it or not, we are all profoundly affected by the cycles of the moon. How? Today on the podcast, we're going to go deep into personal responsibility, what it means to not be a victim in this life. And this discussion may be triggering for certain people. It's triggering for me, quite frankly. So if you don't want to hear this one, skip it. Okay. And the first thing that I want to talk about is a professor of mine, teacher of mine that I had in college. His name is Father Wren. He has since passed away. He taught Zen at a Jesuit university as a priest, which, makes him kind of a controversial figure. He is, for sure, one of the most dedicated humans I've ever had the pleasure of encountering to really giving people a sense of oneness and manifesting their own relationship with God. He's really the best priest I ever met. Now, I'm not Catholic. I didn't grow up Catholic. I grew up very relaxed Christian, Protestant, United Church of Christ, to be specific. No fire and brimstone talk. Mostly golf. You know what I mean? And Father Wren was not about the fire and brimstone. In fact, you often used to say it's odd that the Christian church uses a crucifix as their symbol. It's kind of like putting an electric chair up there and then having that as your symbol, particularly when you consider the horror of dying on a cross. One of the most profound and insightful things that Father Wren taught us was that he would sit at the front of the room. Actually, we all sat in a circle on Zen meditation cushions. It was a Zen class. So we'd be sitting in a circle on Zen meditation cushions in the top floor of the Marquette Hall at Loyola University in New Orleans. And he would say, you are all sadomasochists. And then he would have this smirk on his face, like he just said the funniest thing anyone had ever heard, when really it was the weirdest thing that any of us had ever heard. You are all sadomasochists. You're constantly inflicting and receiving pain and acting like you're not responsible for it. That was the message. And when I first heard that, I thought it was bizarre, but then also the smirk on his face was very telling. It wasn't like a smirk of a comedian or, just somebody who's trying to fuck with us. It was the smirk, the knowing smirk of somebody who had delved into the depths of consciousness and come away with this conclusion that we are, quote unquote, all sadomasochists. And I often think about that because it's so incredibly profound and liberating. If we are all sadomasochists, if I am constantly inflicting pain on myself because I like to receive the pain, and inflicting pain on others because I like to inflict pain on others, then who am I and what's really going on here? What Wren was pointing to is the unfathomable depths of ignorance or ignorance that we as human beings possess. Our capacity to ignore our own source, our own connection to each and every one else. And also our capacity to inflict harm on others and ourselves, and ignore the wounding and the trauma that we have received, or that we have interpreted, or that we have accepted. Now, sometimes, of course, that trauma is inflicted upon children, and one could assert, and I would, that the majority of the trauma that we experience in our lives started when we were children, when we were defenseless, when we had no choice. We were little slaves to our parents. And they said and did whatever they said and did. And the people around them said and did whatever they said and did. And really, there wasn't much we could do about it. Of course, some of these wounds are much more egregious than others, but all of us have them in the formation of our identities on this path. And if we stop and consider that little boy for me, or that little girl, or that little whomever, that little them, didn't know. They didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to interpret things, and they weren't guided appropriately to gauge the fact that right now in this moment when they're receiving trauma and they're crying uncontrollably and the parents like, what did I do? I don't understand. They don't realize even what the damage was. Or maybe it's from something else. That little boy didn't know, and that it's okay. It's important for us as adults to really look at those traumas and offer healing. And what I really feel like Ren meant by we are all sadomasochists, we are constantly inflicting pain and receiving pain, and we just don't want to know, we don't want to see that, is ultimately that's accurate. If ultimately we are all one, and I do believe we are all one, we are all related. There's no getting out of this ecosystem. There's no getting out of humanity. There's no getting out of our connection as human beings to each other, our relatedness, our level of understanding, our capacity for language and discussion and dialogue. There's no getting out of that. So if we are all related, then we are also incredibly powerful. And particularly in our power of ignorance. Easily, we can look back and say, well, I was hurt as a child, and therefore I'm creating behaviors that mimic that pain. The old phrase, hurt people hurt people. Well, that's accurate. People that are wounded hurt people in a similar way so that they can see the other person's reaction. They get something out of it. It's perverse and peculiar and bizarre, but that's just one of the ways that we tend to try to process our own trauma instead of going deep within and like looking at it, talking about it, sussing it out in therapy or meditation or whatever, some kind of a ceremony that you're doing some kind of work that's going to have you look at your own traumas and really accept responsibility for that trauma and the interpretation of that trauma and then heal that. Because otherwise we just end up taking our traumas out on other people. That's just how it goes. We are sadomasochists. We are experiencing that pain. We like the feeling of that pain secretly. And then we inflict that pain on other people because we haven't dealt with that pain. That's just kind of modus operandi for humanity for the last, thousands of years. Okay. Maybe not. I don't know. Maybe you go back to indigenous times and everybody's totally enlightened, walking around like nothing doing. You know what I mean? Engaged in healing circles and such. I don't know. Like, I wish I had a time machine. I could go hang out with Socrates and Plato. You know what I mean? Chop it up. All right. Talk about love and meaning in the world. You know what I mean? I wish I could do that, but I can't. I can just read their books. And of course I can have discussions, and dialogues, which obviously that's what I'm doing now. This idea that we are sadomasochists, that we are fully responsible, 100%, no question about it, responsible for our lives, for who we are, for who I am, and how I occur in the world is, it's very sad on the one hand and extremely liberating on the other. If I take full responsibility for my life, for all the reactions that I've ever had to other people, for all the reactions that I've ever had to myself, for all the times that I didn't step up and step out when I knew I could have, for all the times that I shied away or got scared, if I take responsibility for all those things, for all the times that I got hurt or allowed myself to get hurt or put myself in a situation where I would get hurt and did get hurt, if I take responsibility for all of those things, if I choose not to be a victim, I find myself profoundly liberated. Now, this is not for everybody. It's an unfortunate truth that we are all sadomasochists, that I am a sadomasochist. And I don't want to hear that, which I think is why Ren smirked so. Because he knows that nobody wants to think that they're totally responsible for their own reality. And for sure, nobody wants to think that they are also responsible for all of the pain that they have experienced and also inflicted on other people. Nobody wants to take responsibility, period, especially in our society right now. However, there's just no getting around it. It's not to say that something horribly calamitous could occur that just would cause tremendous trauma to you that you didn't plan on and you weren't expecting, and then this thing just happened. It's not to say that. It's not to say that the Holocaust was planned by the Jews, right? They didn't plan it. It's not to say that a person who was raped or beaten was like, yeah, I really want to get beaten and raped tonight. That's not what I'm saying. It is to say that we have traumas in our life and we can be responsible for our reactions. And we don't have to continue to be a victim of the trauma that we received. And in not being a victim of that trauma, we eliminate the need to inflict whatever sort of pain we're going to inflict on other people. By the way, it doesn't mean that you're going to go, if you got beaten, you're going to go beat somebody up. It doesn't mean that. It could also be in the form of you're just not going to give your gifts to the world. You're going to ignore the fact that you have so much to offer to people because you're afraid of getting beaten. You know, there's all kinds of ways that kind of trauma can spin out when we're in a reactive mode and not in a responsive mode. So how is it that we attain responsive mode? How is it that we attain a responsive mode? And how is it that we maintain being in response rather than reaction, right? Reaction is our instinct. It's what we immediately do. It's when the guy cuts me off in traffic, I start cussing. Know what I mean? Whereas response is weighing the fact that this is a human being and, you know, maybe he's in a hurry and I really have no idea what's going on in his life right now. And he might be just caught up in some personal trauma that has him acting like a, you know, complete jackass on the fucking road in front of me. Asshole. See, that's the voice that comes out, except not usually accented. How do we attain a state of response and not reaction? Awareness. How do we attain awareness? I don't know. I really don't. What works for me, at least what I can see that works for me, where I am less reactive and more responsive, is if I meditate every morning. Super helpful. Yoga, stretching. I do this Tao Bao thing that I'm very fond of every morning. I stare at the sun. It's also being aware of the mechanism. That's the other thing. It's when something happens, and this is really challenging. It's when something happens going straight to, am I being a victim here? Am I being a victim in this moment? How do I be responsible? And that's super hard because what happens physiologically is when we experience some kind of a trauma, we immediately go into fight or flight. Our amygdala hijacks our whole body, right? That's the lizard part of the brain. And it freaks out. It totally freaks out. So asking myself, how do I not be a victim in this situation in the moment of the trauma is very challenging, but it's certainly possible. And if I can actually ask that question, then it allows me to catch myself as I fall into the victim trap. And the victim trap, as I've discussed on this podcast a bunch of times, we're just going to go over it again and again until all of us get it, especially me. You know what I mean? The victim triangle looks thusly. Okay. You got your victim, right? That's the one that the harm occurred for. You got your persecutor. That's the person who did the trauma. And then you got your rescuer over here that's going to rescue you from that situation, from that perpetrator. And it's a triangle because each of those elements is dependent upon the other. And it is ever asserting itself in our reality all the time. If I deny being a victim, if I accept that I'm simply in this situation and that there's nothing that I can do about it, then I stop blaming my persecutor. And I don't look for a rescuer, because the only true rescuer in this reality is me. I'm the only one that can make any difference for me. And that's also the really harsh truth of reality. Even as I say this, don't tell me about reality. I don't need to hear it from you. None of us is really coachable, right? None of us really wants coaching unless we are about that life and we create that reality. Hey, I want to go to the Olympics. Know what I mean? Teach me how to swim fast. I don't know why I chose swimming. It's because I just watched that fucking movie. You know, and it's called Swimming, I think. The Swimmers or something. I don't know. It's about the two sisters. All right, the sisters. And they won. One of them competed in the Olympics. All right, she did. And she was Serbian. In the case of I want to be an Olympic athlete, then I can possibly create a coachable situation. If I engage a mentor and I say, I really want you to be my mentor, and then I really mean that, I could potentially fall into the coachable category. But I have to always watch it because my pride never really wants to be coached. I never want to think that I'm not doing it right, and neither do you. I just want to keep going, all right? And whatever. Just keep it rolling, man. Just keep moving. And when am I going to get? At some point, I'm going to get to the point where I'm actually happy. That's, I think, the default attitude that all of us have. So even as I say all of this, I get that the propensity for each of us is not to listen to what I have to say. Even for myself. And also, and this is, this is really just the shittiest of shitty things. You know what I mean? With extra shit sauce on top of it, basically, is that the victim part of me, the part of me that automatically goes to victim mode, wants to live hard. It really wants to live. So much so that as I embrace being a victim, or I step into that mindset that I am a victim, that neural pathways get created in my brain and neural peptides get created in my brain, which are essentially emotional receptors. They are actual cells that are in my actual noggin, aka that are craving that same kind of awful feeling of not belonging, mixed emotion, traumatic injury. There are neuropeptides that need to feel that way. They need to actually feel that I am a victim and that there is nothing that I can do about my reality and that I don't belong here and that it's all fucked up and I should just jump off a cliff or whatever. Okay, hopefully, by the way, don't do that. If you get anything from this podcast, do not jump off a cliff unless it's intentional and your toes are pointed. Okay? Into the water. Yeah, the shittiest shit part is that the victim part of me really wants to survive and that I like the victim. I dig it. That's the sadomasochist part, right? The sadist likes to inflict pain. The masochist likes to receive pain. Sadomasochism. It's just that we pretend that we're not doing that all the time. That's why bondage is so fascinating to me. And I confess I have not delved into the realm of bondage. I'm not, whatever. I just haven't done it, okay? But I admire the consent that's created, the game that's created, the way that they use that as like therapy for people to liberate them from traumas that they had as children, or just whatever fantasies that they've got going on. I think it can be actually very healthy. And I know friends that swear by it, Well, okay, 2 friends that swear by it out of many, but whatever. It's a little weird. I get it. But go bondage. The most beautiful thing about it is they've really pioneered what it means to actually have a consensual conversation, which is something that we desperately need in this world, particularly when it comes to sex and sexual relations with other people. Okay? You got to have a good consent conversation. You got to be able and willing to talk about what it is that you want, what it is that you don't want, what it is that you're open to, okay? What you need afterwards. You have to have some kind of a conversation like that. Is this okay? Otherwise it's just, it's just going to be gross somehow. It's going to be messed up and not the beautiful thing that it is. All right? The thing that got us all here in the first place. The act of creation. Yep. Anyway. So recognizing that I like to be a victim, that I like to actually experience this trauma, because in part, what got me here was experiencing that trauma and also holding on to that trauma years later. It's weird that we do that, but we do that. We really do. We really hold on to the trauma that was inflicted upon us long after we have survived it, long after the physical wounds that may have been inflicted have healed. We hold on to that trauma like it was yesterday, like it was today, because we haven't dealt with it. So then how do I deal with it? How do I deal with my own trauma? And how do I see that I am responsible for my own trauma? Recently, I got surgery. I got metal removed from an elbow injury where I had a plate in my elbow because I shattered my elbow riding a electronic vehicle. And I also got metal removed from my foot that's been there since 2012 from a motorcycle accident that I was in where I was T-boned by a truck. So this is actual trauma that has occurred. By the way, the surgery went great. Thanks for asking. I'm healed. I feel great not having metal in my body. I feel like I'll be able to straighten my arm all the way one of these days. And, my foot's coming back in a strong way. It's feeling good, you guys. I'll be able to do some kickboxing anytime now. So these are 2 examples of actual trauma that occurred. Well, so when I was hit by the truck, it was her fault. I was at an intersection and I was driving south on La Brea Boulevard in Los Angeles, crossing San Vicente. And I had a green light and I was in the right lane. And I saw this lady in a black Ford F-150 stop in front of my lane. Now, anybody who's riding a motorcycle assumes that if someone stops in front of the lane, they see the traffic that is coming, which I also did. And then she went as soon as I got into the intersection. And she hit me and I, fell off my bike and I looked up and she was on the telephone. She was on the cell phone. She had it to her face. Back in the day when that was like an extra no-no. Before, cars had speakerphones and all that shit connected. And with the other electric vehicle thing where I broke my elbow, it died basically when it wasn't supposed to. And and I had an accident, and it wasn't because I was off balance. You know what I mean? It just quit. So in both of those incidents, one could look at the trauma that happened and say, well, it's their fault. They did me wrong. That's, they're the bad guy, help me, whatever, hospital, people around me, mom. And, there's a legal thing about all this, right? Like the lady who hit me with her truck, her insurance paid for it, right? She hit me. But then there's also, do I give my power over to her and become a victim of this situation where it wasn't her that inflicted, it was her that inflicted the pain, but she didn't do it on purpose. It's not like she saw me and she was like, oh, I think I'll just run over this motorcycle rider. That's not how it went down. She was on her phone. She wasn't paying attention. She stopped in front of the lane. She was used to stop in front of the lane. She just went. She didn't think anybody was coming, and she hit me. And she was like, oh my God. And if I really look back, honestly, outside of the fact that she was on her phone, the other thing on her face was absolute terror that she just could have killed somebody. She was looking down on me on the pavement, my bike under her truck with absolute terror, screaming into the phone like, oh my God, So I can point the finger at her and I could say it's her fault. She did this to me. I can do that. And I can be bitter about it. And I can be mad at people in trucks. Whatever, right? I can carry this resentment that they did me wrong and they messed up my foot, which, by the way, I can still run and everything. It's not, it just hurts sometimes. But now I got the plate out. It's going to be fine. I can pretend as if she is responsible and I've totally screwed it up. Or I can take responsibility. I put myself on that motorcycle. I was driving through traffic. And in fact, if I really want to cut a little deeper on it, and I do, at the moment of the accident, I was having you ever get those intuitions where you're like, something is off today? And it just feels there's a darkness and I don't know what it is, right? You ever get those intuitions? I had one of those that day. And it wasn't like, don't ride your motorcycle per se. It was just like something dark was going to happen. It wasn't going to be fun. And then it did happen. And also I put myself in this situation. I was riding the motorcycle. I take responsibility for my actions. Now it hurt. The physical trauma was severe. For me, the lesson of it was embrace this life. This life is precious. Follow your dreams, follow your passions, continue to do what you're doing unabashedly and accept your fate, right? That's the lesson. Now, to the degree that I have taken those lessons, still being revealed in my life. However, I can say I am not walking around worried about that. And I don't have trauma from it. Same thing with the elbow injury. I put myself on that vehicle. I'm not happy about the result, but I'm not a victim of it either. And the wounds have healed, and I've accepted that I am responsible. And also I've looked at, what is the deeper lesson? What is life trying to tell me? What is God trying to tell me? The creator? What is the path here? And by the way, I'm not saying that I'm right about any of this, particularly the God part of it. I don't know if God is real, if God exists. I don't know if there's a divine plan. I don't know. But it's helpful to me to explore that idea. And I definitely think that we are all related. And I definitely think that this whole situation here on Earth is very peculiar and interesting and fascinating and beautiful, and that there's wonder and love. So I choose to ask myself, what is the lesson? If there is a lesson in this injury, in what happened, It's to take greater care, to accept that this life is precious. Now that's what's there for me, to not be prideful. That's a big one for me. Don't be prideful. Don't be arrogant. Don't think you're just going to cruise around your Harley Davidson, in your leather jacket and everything's going to be totally fine, because some shit could happen. Like, be really careful. Be more conscious and aware of your surroundings, right? And the pride thing, I find, like, very often, pride, what is it? What is that saying? Pride goeth before a fall. Yeah. If there's part of you, in fact, in both those situations that I was in, where I was in an accident, pride was involved heavily. I felt very prideful about, writing these things. Then nothing bad would happen. And then something did. That's just a lesson for me. But the main point that I'm trying to make here is that we as human beings have the choice to be a victim or not be a victim. We have the choice to be a sadomasochist, to actually look through that lens. How am I ultimately responsible for the situation that I am in? And how do I extricate myself? How do I look beyond? How do I rise above? How do I push through the circumstances that I am in to choose a more loving way of being in the world? How do I operate from love? How do I embrace the love operating system? And that question, in and of itself, as an operating principle, is profoundly beneficial and valuable. That question, how do I operate from love more, automatically gives me license to operate from love more, and prevents me from dipping into the land of the victim. And also, by the way, that is looking at the oneness. That is looking toward the light. You see, I wholeheartedly believe that we are all totally responsible for our perspective in the world. And if we're constantly looking at the darkness and how bad it is, that's what we're going to live. Whereas if we're constantly looking at the light and the curiosity and how do I overcome, and how do I create justice in my life for myself and for others, and how do I live in harmony, and how do I live with honor and respect, and how do I respect and honor those around me and this planet? How do I get deeper into my relationship with the Creator, the source of all life, whether it's the Big Bang or it's, Captain Crunch on the other side of the moon? How do I offer something that's going to be valuable for other people? Those questions are profoundly valuable. And the love operating system as a principle, how do I love my life more? How do I give love more? How do I act more loving in this situation that is not full of love? That way of being is, for me, a gateway to walking a life that is more awake. And that's my goal. So having said all of this, I really want to respect and appreciate each of us on our path here. I certainly don't want this Solocast to go down as me just saying, don't be a victim. That's not what I'm saying. And that is what I'm saying. I recognize people have traumas. All of us are wounded. And all of us are healing or not healing, as it were. I just want to appreciate each of us on our own path, wherever you are. Maybe you need some TLC, some love. You need to lick your wounds. I get that. I totally get that. And I just want you to know that I don't say any of this out of any kind of, I've got it all figured out. And you don't. I feel like the spirit of this podcast and what we're doing here is that we are all figuring this out together and looking at things that work and throwing stuff up against the wall. and hoping it sticks. And if it doesn't, moving on. So I get that if you are in a place in your own process where you're just not even willing to look at the fact that you could be responsible for something that happened to you in the past and your reaction to it, I just want to respect and appreciate that. And I do hope that at some point that is a possibility that you could see, because I really feel the only power that we have in this life is responsibility. It's ironic because it's the thing that we avoid at all costs. We don't really want to be responsible for our lives. That's just, we don't. We don't want to listen to somebody else talk to us and give us guidance. And we definitely don't want to be wrong and look bad, for sure. We don't want that at all. Okay. And yet it's the only thing that gives us power. The only way out is through. The only possible way that I can live my life fully expressed is if I have total integrity, is if I honor my word. I do what I say I'm going to do, and I heal the wounds that I have with the people that I have in my life. I heal the relationships in my life that I need to heal. I don't say that out of any kind of arrogance at all. It's just the unfortunate conclusion that I have reached, and that many have reached, that the path of integrity, the path of really honoring your path, honoring your word, honoring who you say you are and what you say you're going to do in the world is really a profoundly liberating path. And we're always being knocked off and trying to play games in the background and running rackets, like the mafia. You know what I mean? No, everything's fine. Everything's fine. How's it going? Oh, everything's fine. But really on the inside, I'm dying. You know what I mean? Or I want to murder somebody, right? There's profound suffering that I won't let on to, I'm putting on a front, a face, here's my Insta, check out my gram. I got smiles all over the place, man. I'm super happy everywhere in the world that I go. That's true, but it's not. Really, I'm suffering and I'm sad. You know what I mean? That's how I think it goes. And there's no question to me that what we are realizing as a people now is the profound opportunity of healing and transformation in the world. That given all that has happened in history, given all that we've experienced, given how far we've come, given the immense atrocities that we have inflicted on each other, given the immense power to blow up the world with nuclear weapons that we have now, given how we can see the environment is affected by our actions, from the Great Pacific Garbage Patch to, the rising temperature. Given all of that, we have a profound opportunity to wake up, to walk an awakened path, or rather to walk an awakening path. Because this whole woke thing just doesn't, it's very arrogant to say one is woke. I think, you know what I mean? If I start saying I'm enlightened, slap me in the face. All right. I'm walking an enlightening path where I am trying to light my own way and hopefully at the same time lighten up yours a little bit. You know what I mean? That's the goal here. So all that to say, I get the struggle that this presents. I see it in my own life on a daily basis. I'm going to leave this podcast. I'm sure something's going to come up later on during the day that I want to avoid, not take responsibility for, while I win. I'm sure that's going to happen. I know it's going to happen. Maybe not today, maybe tomorrow. The question that I ask myself is, how do I just be a little more conscious in that situation? How do I be a little more responsive and a little less reactive? How do I stop being a silly little puppet? You know what I mean? On these victim strings, on the strings of neural peptides that I created when I was a child that I don't even remember creating, that just happened to be in my brain. How do I starve those suckers out with love? Know what I mean? How do I walk the beauty way? It's not that I am walking the beauty way. It's that I'm asking the question, how do I walk the beauty way? The answers naturally follow. There's a trust and a faith that happens and occurs in each of us, where if I really accept that I am totally responsible for my life in all of its forms and all of my reactions, then I have the opportunity to create it in a way that I dream of doing. And if I have the courage to really dream big, then I can create great and beautiful things. And the more that I get sidetracked and get hooked, like a fish, right, in the ocean. Can you imagine if you're a fish in the ocean and somebody catches you, a fisherman catches you, and now it's like in your cheek and you're just like, oh, what this thing happened? Oh my God, you don't understand. How do I recognize that I'm being hooked, that I'm diving into the victim trap? How do I extricate myself from that and move more into healed creativity? How do I take the hook out of my mouth? Well, for me, it's taking responsibility. I'm responsibility. I am responsible. I am responsible for my reactions to whatever it was that happened, to the hook going in my mouth. I am responsible for who I am on this planet and how I leave people. And then if I choose love, if I choose to be loving, if I actively embrace that idea of opening my heart, of really truly being with people and actually listening to them, I notice that the world brightens and the people around me brighten. And I am happy. So I just want to end with that invitation. Ask the question. Ask the operating principle question. How do I love more? And see what happens. Thank you for listening. I really appreciate you embracing this program. We're actually about to launch a community where people can contribute and play a part and have dialogue and discussion. I'm really excited about that, and I'm really excited to have you in that dialogue with me. Lunacy is a creation of myself, Geoff Eido, with podcast management by Kimberly Joy Voice. Much love.